Hello, this is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the Jewish Contrarians podcast. And I'm here with my usual partner in thought crime, Brandy Shafatinsky. Hello, Brandy.
Hey, David.
And our special guest who's been on before, Rabbi Mark Cohn. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
So we're going to have a conversation about the wicked son. And by wicked son, I mean both in the proverbial figure in the Passover Haggadah. If you want to call it the wicked child, we can do that. We also, the radical anti-Zionist wicked son that we see in our Jewish community today. Again, you don't want to call them that, that's fine, but I'm going to for the purpose of this podcast. Now, we're doing this now because it's a big issue in the Jewish community. I don't think I give a presentation where somebody doesn't say, what are you going to do about these radical anti-Zionist Jewish kids who are coming up and protesting and blah, 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 blah. So I hear it all the time. The second reason is Passover is just around the corner. And I know this because I was in the grocery store yesterday and literally they're already got the Passover cakes up, and out. So we are nearing that time. And I figure it would be a good time to start reflecting on this. And I have two really smart people to help me do it. But before I go to them, I'm just going to share a couple observations, a couple experiences that might help frame the conversation. When I was at my rabbi's sukkah some time ago, I met a guy who I'd heard his name, and he sometimes made contentious remarks during services, during the sermon. I'm not going to use his name, obviously, that wouldn't be good. But the rabbi introduced us, said his name, and I asked him what he did. And it turns out he worked for Jewish Voices for Peace, a radical anti-Zionist organization, one that I really don't like. I'm sure many of you have heard of Jewish Voices for Peace. Anyway, I told them what I was doing at the time. It was not the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, but it was a mainstream Jewish organization. And we looked at each other, and we both had scotch in our hands, and we clinked our glass and said, L'chaim. Later on, by the way, that evening, I said, so you work for Jewish Voices for Peace? And he said, yes. And he says, yeah, I'm thinking about leaving because it's really anti-Semitic. I said, you mean it's anti-Zionist? He goes, no, I don't mean anti-Zionist. I'm anti-Zionist. He goes, I mean, it is a lot of the people who work there are just blatantly anti-Semitic. So anyway, do that with that as you will. Another recent experience. Oh, before I talk about that other recent experience, it made me think a little bit, that encounter. So would I go back next year to my Rabbi Sukkah knowing he was going to be there? And the answer is yeah, sure. I mean, it didn't cost me anything to have that exchange with this person. I don't like his politics. I strongly disagree with him. Would I invite him to my Seder? The answer is no, probably not. If my son was that kid, would I invite them to the Seder? The answer is yes, I would, because I love my child. My children are not in that place, but if I did have one, I would certainly keep the conversation open. Would I be on a panel discussion with that guy at my synagogue? And the answer is no, I would not be on a panel discussion with that guy at my synagogue because I don't want to platform that view. I'm for a very large Overton window, both inside and outside the Jewish community, but it does not include, at least in the Jewish conversation, aren't anti-Zionists. I think that the Jewish people should be, supportive of Israel. That doesn't mean supportive of every Israeli government position. That doesn't mean we can't disagree even strongly about what Israel should do. But to me, Israel is the great miracle of our time. It's 75 years old. It's an established country. And to oppose its very right to exist seems to me outrageous and absurd. And I don't want that to become a more popular view within our tradition. And if it does, it does. But that's not what I want to see happen. The second recent experience is I was talking to a Chabad, and there were 50 Jewish students that were at this dinner at Chabad. A marvelous group of kids. Really enjoyed the exchanges with them. Very lively, very serious students who were thinking about these issues. And during the conversation, of course, somebody asked me the dreaded question, what do you do about that these anti-Zionist young people. And I gave my answer. I won't tell you what it is because I don't want to scoop myself here. But then the Rebbitzin, the rabbi's wife, chimed in saying, "I think these people should be absolutely written out. They're not Jews anymore. They shouldn't be thought of as the Jewish people." And at that very moment, the rabbi, who loves his wife clearly, and they have a very cute relationship, gets up and says, "I totally disagree with her." And he said, "I believe that we have to be able to welcome people like that in the community and be in conversation with them." And I love that, by the way, that exchange, because it was sort of a demo of the whole idea that there's these arguments within the Jewish people that are really important to have, and that it's okay to have those arguments and those disagreements. It doesn't mean that I want the anti-Zionists to be part of it, but I want the discussion to be about what we should do about the wicked son. And what we should do about the wicked son at our Passover Seder, but what we should do about the wicked son and how we should think about it. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who has some rabbinical wisdom to share about this. So, Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, David and Brandy, great to be with you both, as always. So hopefully I can bring some insight. Maybe there's a little wisdom in here. What was going through my mind, David, as you were speaking, are a couple of things. One was a quote that Yossi Klein Halevi talks about, of how when we look at kind of who's in and outside of the Jewish tent right now, that a bit of a line in the sand was the rally back in November in Washington, D.C., that those Jews who wanted to be there or actually were there, and Jewish organizations that were present there, those are folks who are within the tent of Zionism and of support of Israel and ideas about Jewish oneness and peoplehood, even though we might disagree on policy issues or how to approach. For those folks like JVP who very much were not there at that rally in November, they're outside of the tent. And so when you mentioned about who you would want at your Seder, this fellow who was a former or still whatever JVP Nick, you'd say, you know what, not so much not going to be invited to my Seder. If my own child were of that camp, yes, still coming to my Seder. And that's an important part when we think about the 4 children who are represented in the Haggadah. They're all there. Different approaches, different ways of learning. And sometimes we think about the 4 children as actually one person just over the course of life. There are times when we're more simple, or we don't know what to ask, or we actually have some wisdom, or we are indeed the wicked one. And if we think about in Jewish ideology that we might have children that really disappoint us or really do some things that are indeed bad or evil, but what parent actually doesn't have a modicum of, or should have, a sense of rachmanut, of compassion and kindness? After all, we come from the rechem, from the womb. We call God Avinu. This is our parent, our father. And so there is that sense of, even when our child is going in a direction that we definitely don't agree with, we might even call it wicked, still we're going to have them at the Seder. I read there's a fabulous essay by Jonathan Sachs. There are many excellent essays that he wrote in his Haggadah. One of them, he specifically deals with, and there's the picture. Thank you, Dan. He specifically deals with the wicked son. And he talks about something that was just fascinating. And he's looking in a midrash. There are 2 midrashim that come from early rabbinic era, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century. One is called the Mechilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The other is called the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yishmael, who were friends, and their schools of learning that followed them, had a lot of important teaching. They had a different approach in life. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is known as a mystic. Rabbi Yishmael more the rationalist. They both, in this collection of interpretations of Midrashim, they both bring up the issue of the wicked son, and the quotes that some folks may recognize from sitting around the Seder table. In Mechilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he talks about this idea the wicked son is saying, what does this service mean to you? This is an important quote. It's a quote from the book of Exodus that the rabbis extract and then use to prove their point. What does this service mean to you? Maha avodah hazot lecha. That person is labeled wicked because he excludes himself from the community by saying, what does it mean to you? And the rabbis, of course, are going to come back with another answer, one of which we find in the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, when Rabbi Yishmael says, grabbing elsewhere in Exodus, it's because of what God did for me. Had you been there, you would not have been redeemed because you cut yourself out by saying, what is this service to you? You didn't talk about what it means for us as a community. And so the wicked one is seen as someone who cuts themselves off from the community. And that is the antithesis of what another one of the great sages talks about, is that don't cut yourself off. Al tifros min hatzibur. Don't cut yourself off from the community. The one who cuts himself off, that is the antithesis of what it means to be Jewish. What Sachs does is he presents these midrashim, and yes, the differences between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but he sets it in historic context. Why are they writing these commentaries? What are they about? This comes from the 1st, 2nd century in Israel. When Rome has taken over, they've destroyed the Second Temple. There are Jews who are beginning to affiliate with this new Christian sect and who are not necessarily going to stand with the Jewish people with the Hadrianic persecutions and then the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132. What Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai are saying is to be wicked is to cut yourself out from the Jewish people. Even though these two rabbis disagreed on things and had different approaches to their expression of Judaism, they were both loyal to Judaism and our shared sense of identity and destiny. And they shared a great sense of distress and anger at the Jews who left the fold. That for them, in this interpretation, is what it means to be wicked. And sadly, those in our own community, I'm not one to say you're a Jew, you're not a Jew, but those who cut themselves out, not only is it distressing, it literally sides with our enemies. And that is very difficult to deal with. So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm very grateful for Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory and his teaching on that, because it gives, I think, really relevant discussion for us, right?
Thank you, Mark. Brandy, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I agree with the Rebbetzin. No, I think that that's actually, I do a little bit. I think that there is a little bit of a line drawn to where, what does it mean to actually be a Jew? What does it mean to be part of the Jewish people? And I think that's a question that I think we actually have to talk about and wrestle with as far as the anti-Zionist Jews. If you're an anti-Zionist Jew, I don't know why you would be at a Seder table to begin with. And I mean, if it were my kid, and it isn't, my kids are all very strong Zionists, but if it were, I look at it kind of like, I'll feed them, but I'm not going to pay for your tuition. It's that type of thing. That I think that there's a conversation that has to be had over what does it mean to be Jewish? How are you Jewish without Zion? How are you Jewish without Israel? What does it mean? And I mean, that's the where I go when we're having these conversations about what does it mean to be an anti-Israel Jew? How is that possible? Then how are you Jewish?
I've been having this exchange on Twitter here and there with this Jewish studies professor who is an anti-Zionist. And, and what I realized is that he has this vision of sort of the, socialist Jew of the Bund in Yiddish speaking, America. And he wants us to be like these, intellectuals who have this great heritage, who could talk to each other about, their socialism and about their, social justice causes. It's a very different understanding of what it means to be Jewish. And he doesn't see Israel as part of that equation. He thinks that Israel got us away from his form of authentic Judaism. Now, but I find that extremely uncompelling, and I don't want to, that's not my Judaism, but it is his. And the question is, do I invalidate that altogether and say, well, or do I just sort of say, okay, there they are, they're on the side, they're doing their little Bundes thing, but they're not really central to the Jewish people anymore.
I just wonder at that one, okay, what happened to all the Bundes? They're gone. They were slaughtered.
Yes.
For that thought. But then at what point do they become Bundes instead of being Jews?
Right. Well, these are people who claim and are using Jewish language to do it, and they might go to synagogue, by the way, and they might even have a synagogue with a rabbi that sort of represents their form of Judaism and who sort of validates it and so forth. So they're out there, and it makes me think. There's another thing. I've never actually said this to even any of you guys. I was recently on a podcast. It's like some kind of atheism podcast or whatever, where I debated a guy who graduated from the same Jewish day school that my son did. He's within the sort of liberalism space. I'm not going to say his name because I really don't want you to look it up, but if you Googled it, you probably find it. And I didn't exactly know what it was going to be, but he's somebody who's been negative about Israel, but never denied Israel's right to exist. But he's extremely negative about his Judaism. Grew up Orthodox, had this rebellion, feels like he was indoctrinated, blah, blah, blah. And so he's embraced sort of all of these like negative tropes and this idea that Jewish identity itself and peoplehood is completely inauthentic and whatever. And when I was done with it, I felt very icky for being on it. I'm not sorry I did it because I believe in open discourse, but I don't want to dedicate more than like 1% of my time, 1/10 of 1% doing that. Right. And because that's not the conversation I want to be on an ongoing basis. Maybe I did it once. Someone wants to find it, it's there, but it's not, I don't want to be defending the idea of Jewish identity people. Jewish identity people is real. I live it. Other people live it. If you want to be out there discounting it, fine, but I don't want to spend a lot of time, if any, doing it. And I sort of feel like that about the overall Wicked Son. Like, okay, they're there. And yes, are they a growing percentage in the Jewish community? Yeah, I'm sure they are. Are they the dominant stream in their own, among young American Jews? I don't believe so. And I don't think that the survey data bears that out at all. And so I sort of don't want to be engaging what I like to call adversary obsession. Like, I just want to let them do their thing, and we should ignore them as much as possible and spend very little bit of our mind share on them. That's my feeling.
It's a really important point because it's so easy. What did you call it? Adversary obsession?
Yeah.
Like, it's really easy to want to go after that roughly, let's just call it 10% of either side of extreme. It's easy to, and I go down any number of rabbit holes on them, and to pull back and say, wait a second, actually the majority of people, we know this, the majority of Americans are supportive of what's going on, and just to pull on Israel right now, supportive of what's going on in Israel. The majority of American Jews are supportive of what's happening right now, very concerned about anti-Semitism in this country. For those who are, and I thought, Brandy, when you mentioned, the Bundes, tragically, because of the Shoah, they were killed in Europe, and those here in the United States, it just fizzled. And the anti-Zionism with it that they held, and so too in the Reform Jewish world, the world where I come from. The Reform Jewish world had any number of anti-Zionists before 1948. Once the state was established, the movement basically said, it's here. For those who didn't embrace that, I have no idea where they are right now, but it's not there. And that is one of the great struggles that we have in the Reform Jewish world in particular, is the rise and presence of anti-Zionism and synagogues that are split about do we say this? Do we not support this program because maybe people will be offended by it? As opposed to, thank God, any number of colleagues that I'm proud to stand with, and we come up and say straight out, of course, we're supporting Israel. We're deeply troubled by what's going on, but let's think about the majority, not just the loud voice of those who are the wicked son, as it were.
Yeah.
I feel a little not that I want to get into a tit for tat with somebody who thinks that Israel has no right to exist. However, I do want to look at why, even though it's minuscule, that's growing. Because I don't want to wake up one day and think, if only I'd said something 10 years ago. Now look at the number, and it's not 10%, it's 20. I think there is a point in a threshold where it becomes problematic. And part of the reason I suspect it's growing is because, anybody that I've spoken with who's Jewish and an anti-Zionist, what they define as Zionism isn't Zionism. And so knowing that there's something there that we actually need to actively address in order for that minuscule number not to grow.
Yeah. But it may not be taking it on in that way. In other words, thinking about it may mean actually focusing on those who are already in our camp. I mean, I think there's a possible, like, the diagnosis and the prescription may be two different things. So let me give you an example of that. Michal Biton, she's a young Jewish thinker out of New York. I think very impressive up and coming Jewish thinker. She talks about this a lot, and she says that that we make the mistake in thinking that all these young Jews are like social justice warriors, right? And so we end up designing Jewish life, even the mainstream organizations design Jewish life to appeal to social justice warriors. And then people like my son and his friends who went to Jewish day school, but they're not social justice warriors. They're not conservatives either. They're just, okay, I want to hang out with some Jews. Go to these things, and it's about, whatever social justice topic du jour is, and they're turned off by it. That's just not what they want to talk about. And she was saying, and she runs this very vibrant minyan, I think, in New York City, and said that almost all the Jews that she encounters are not that, and we're designing Jewish life around them. So what I want to do is design Jewish life around some of more like normie sentiments, and build that up and strengthen that and make that the bulwark against these sort of radical trends. Because the problem with these radical Jews on the far left is they're just reflecting the radicalism within the larger progressive ideological camp. And so as long as that is a credible stream of thought, I think some percentage of Jews are going to want to align themselves with it. And I don't think we can deal with it. The more that weakens, the more that the anti-Zionist camp will weaken as well. That's my thought.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with that. I think that I think we're seeing it in actually a lot of different spiritual centers. So whether it's churches or synagogues, where there's this desperation to appeal to a minority, thinking that the minority is not a minority, thinking it's bigger than it is as far as ideology. And in doing that, I think it's true that there's a chance perhaps that you're losing the younger generation that just want to go, hang out with Jews, learn some stuff, eat food and the like, and socialize. But everything's becoming so radicalized and partisan that there's a chance of losing that.
Right. I always say that when the more you embrace this sort of social justice ideology mystique in your synagogue, you're also alienating another group of people. You may say, well, I'm doing this to be inclusive to a certain group of people. Yes, but what about the Jew from the former Soviet Union or from Persia or from wherever else who hears that and just walks out because it reminds them of what they used to hear in Russia or Iran?
Or for those of us in synagogue life, our focus ought to be on God, Torah, and Israel. That's Israel, meaning the people and the land. What's happened, and I have been guilty of it at times as well, it's very tempting to go after, and sometimes there are statements that need to be made about what's happening in the larger world around us. But if we are using the tool as a weapon, God forbid, that's not good for the Jewish people. And it certainly doesn't open up the door for our synagogues to be a place where people, regardless of their political persuasion, can at least come together and say, yeah, we're part of the Jewish people. We're here to celebrate Shabbat or Pesach or whatever that is. That's where we need to drill down into, to make sure we have the actual information of what does it mean to be Jewish. Judaism is not, although there are many times when you may take your Judaism to the streets, as it were, but Judaism is about far more than just that.
Right. So our friend David Hazoni, who wrote this book, Jewish Priorities, that's been circulating, I have an essay in there, said that this is sort of, it's sort of a tribute to the Jewish people. It encompasses a range of perspectives, from Israel critical perspective to like a settler perspective. But it doesn't, I don't think there's anybody in there that's calling for expulsion of the Palestinian population. There's no Kahanist essay, and there's also no anti-Zionist essay. And a lot of those people who were who wrote essays probably wouldn't want to come together more than maybe once a year on a panel or one time in an essay. In other words, we're carving out some piece where the Jewish people, the largest possible tent and version of the Jewish people, can exist. And we're giving that some validation, that there's a range of voices and that we have to validate them. I don't want to dwell necessarily in that widest tent possible for that long, but I want to spend some time in it. And maybe there's a more narrow tent that I'm going to spend a lot more time talking to people who I might disagree with, but I disagree with sort of, like the 30-yard line to the 30-yard line, right? And maybe I'm on the 50-yard line. I don't know. Maybe some people would say I'm on the 30-yard line of another side, or even on the 20 or 10. I don't know. But the bottom line is I want to dwell in the tent where there's more common ground, because I think there's more productivity when there's more common ground. But that doesn't mean I won't go into that bigger tent every once in a while and hang out with some of those people who I strongly, strongly disagree to my right or my left. How does that sound like a...
So I mean, it sounds good to me. I mean, after all, I have the book itself and have taught various essays from it. Because it goes back actually to what Sachs is saying about Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. There's a shared sense of destiny here. That range of voices, those 65 voices that are in there, and Chazoni helped to put that together, obviously. There's an overall trend or movement or desire and recognition that we are literally all in this together. And so, yeah, I might read some of the essays and say, yeah, not so much for me. That's not what I feel personally, but we're all part of Am Yisrael, and we can embrace that. And yes, you're right. I think in general, we often do that, though, don't we? That we wind up, clustering with those with whom we're more or less like-minded. And yeah, we'll dance and have discussions with others as well. And at a certain point, there are those who are outside of the 65 priorities.
Exactly. Yeah. Brandy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that a thing to consider too is what's actually happening. I think we're in a time period right now where we need to come together more in that bigger tent for a common goal and a common cause, because there's an existential threat that Jewish communities around the world are facing, obviously in Israel, but also here in the US and in other countries, where I think we actually do have to expand a little bit to figure out, okay, what can we do together?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Even with the people that I'm on the opposite side strategically on a lot of these issues facing the Jewish community, if they're Zionists and they care about the fate of the Jewish people in Israel, I can have an argument with them on one day and work with them on another day. I'm not sure, Brandy, that we've always agreed precisely on that, where we would do it. I mean, I sat for lunch, and I'm not going to name the person's name, with one of the people that I'm talking about not too long ago on a trip that I was on. And, we disagreed about a lot. I think if you were to actually look issue by issue, we probably agree on more than we disagree. But the things that we disagree about really put us on opposite sides of our work right now. And I think he's very wrong, by the way. And I'm going to fight like hell to beat him. But I still think, and by the way, I would be more willing to include him in a communal conversation than he would be willing to include me. Which is telling, I think, partly because he represents in his own mind the dominant perspective, the part of the Jewish community that is still in charge, which suggests that we should, actively engage diversity, equity, inclusion, which we should stay really close touch with our progressive allies, which we should be willing to accept sort of an ideological form of ethnic studies as long as it doesn't have anti-Semitism in it, blah, blah, blah. He represents that vibe. And I don't. And he thinks because of his positioning, he's going to try to keep me and you, by the way, out of the conversation as long as he possibly can, so that he continues to look like he's representing the majority. And if I'm there, he's losing some of that. But what happens is there's a sort of incumbents disadvantage on that. The insurgents like us over time start to push back freely, because they want to ignore us. They want to pretend we don't exist so they can continue to be dominant. But if we continue to agitate, we end up gaining the upper hand over time, or we end up on par, and then they can't ignore you anymore. That's sort of the dynamic, by the way, whether you're the incumbent or the insurgent. The insurgent has a certain advantage over time because the incumbent wants to ignore you and deplatform you. And in any event, I still think that, he was willing to have lunch with me. He just wasn't willing to have me come and speak at his conference. Or have a podcast. I doubt if I invited him on my podcast, he would show up. So I think that's where it's interesting. Like, some of this is governed by sort of the politics of community power. And those are real considerations. Like I said, I would, clink my glass with somebody at my rabbi's Seder. I wouldn't invite them to my Seder, and I wouldn't be on a panel with a person, not because he's so despicable because I don't want to empower him. And I'm hoping that I won't have to, because I don't want to one day wake up, as Brandy was saying, to half of young Jews who are anti-Zionist, and now we really can't ignore them anymore. I hope we can get it under control. And I think the best way to do that is to strengthen the people who already agree with us, already inclined, who want to be an active part of this Zionist Jewish enterprise, and to strengthen their hand and, dedicate a little but not too much time with the small minority view.
No, I agree with that. I think that there also comes a time, and I think we're in it, where people have to be presented with a choice. And for people like whoever it was you met for lunch, as long as they gatekeep and pretend that they're the only option out there, then people, like just community members, won't understand that there are other options for them for actually pushing back against anti-Semitism and improving Jewish education and working with the next generation. So
is he succeeding in gatekeeping, though? That's what I want to ask you. I mean, he might be succeeding in keeping me out of the panel discussion that he controls, but are we able to access the larger audience?
I mean, it seems that way, but it's like a cookie tasting contest, a bake contest. When people get the options, they're going to tell you which one they prefer, and it should be that way for ideas. And I'm hoping, it seems to be that we're moving in that direction, so people are understanding, hey, you can listen to what we have to hear, and if you align with it, great, we'll work together. But the preventing of people having that choice and understanding their options is where what I find problematic. I'm perfectly fine expressing my views. I'm perfectly fine hearing from people who disagree with them and hearing what other people think. When people are worried about, okay, I won't platform this person or won't have them on my to come speak at my event, I always wonder, well, what are you worried about? You're worried about your audience liking what I have to say more than
exactly. Yeah, that's what they're gatekeeping. They're worried that we're going to be influential on their own audience, and that we are being influential, and they're just going to hold on to it as long as they possibly can, whatever institutional advantage, as long as they can. But while they're doing that, while they're pretending to ignore us but very worried about us, we're going to continue to agitate. And I feel like in this sense, if you flip the metaphor a bit, we're now the wicked son in that context. Like, that's why I don't want to declare the wicked son wicked. The wicked son can be the person pushing back against the community, and so in this different context, we're now playing that role, and gladly and proudly so. All right.
That was exactly what I was thinking.
You're going to say, right
in that direction. But you know what? Sometimes it's not so bad, right? Sometimes someone to ask the question, and when to really sit and say, what is this moment supposed to mean to you? What are we supposed to do right now? It's okay to push a bit too, or a lot.
Exactly. Well, okay, it's been a very rich conversation, as I thought it would be, and we'll pick this up again, I'm sure, at some point, maybe after Pesach, but we'll certainly be talking soon. So thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.